Born Before 64 is a TV show that asks the vital question, what will we do for the rest of our lives? Kathryn Raaker hosts a show for baby boomers and above, inviting real people to tell real stories about overcoming issues, about facing with courage and triumph the significant obstacles many of us face every day. Born Before 64 TV shows will cover topics that this generation is interested in. So let's join Kathryn Raaker for Born Before 64.
Hi, this is Kathryn Raaker of Born Before 64, and I'm honored today to have a World War II pilot named Max Schuette to tell his story on our Born Before 64 show, and also for Songs and Stories for Soldiers. And I want to welcome you to our show today, Max.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Can you tell us a little bit about your story, Max?
All right.
You were in World War II, am I right?
Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about it? And you can look at the camera as well.
All right. Well, I was in college at the University of Chicago and a freshman. And this was in 1942 when I went to Chicago. But it was pretty clear that after Pearl Harbor, every able-bodied man was going to be in some form of military service. So I wanted to be in what was then the Army Air Force. And ironically, since I was under 21, I had to get my parents' permission.
So were you 18 or 19 when that happened, Max?
Well, I was 19 in 44. In April of 44, I turned 19. And I decided I wanted to fly. I'd had no flying experience before, but that's where I wanted to be. So, and it was at that time considered to be an elite
group.
Yes, and they had very high standards for physical and mental ability, and I was able to pass those standards, and I became enlisted in the aviation cadet program.
And how long were you in that, Max?
Well, it was just a little over a year. In March of 44, I got my commission, second lieutenant.
Right.
And my pilot wings, and then went into a transition training program. At that time, I was assigned to the B-24.
And what was that like to fly, Max?
Well, I enjoyed flying. Of course, it's more fun to fly a smaller ship.
Right.
B-24 was a 4-engine bomber. It was, more B-24s were built during the war than any other airplane of any sort, trainer or bomber or fighter aircraft. It was a 4-engine plane that carried a crew of 10, 4 officers, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and bombardier were the officers, and then the crewmen, 6 crewmen who were gunners,
right,
manned the different gun positions. I was very fortunate to get a very talented crew. So, and we flew virtually all of our missions together. Flew 25 missions in the European theater, and based in southern Italy. The German Air Force was literally out of gas.
By the time that you were actually in the squadron, they were pretty well, when you mean out of gas, what do you mean by that?
Literally. The earlier Strategic Bombing Command, we were part of the Strategic Air Force.
Right.
And we bombed refineries and major transportation targets, and some manufacturing targets as well. But we flew, we were in 5 campaigns, northern Italy, the Po Valley, Central Europe, the Rhineland, and the Balkans.
Wow.
And because of earlier strategic bombing, which had targeted the refineries, it pretty well destroyed the major sources of fuel for the Air Force.
So that's what you meant by out of gas. You really
Yeah.
did get them out of gas, right?
They had no source. They had sources in Romania, the Ploesti oil fields, but our early campaign, before I even arrived in my squadron, had pretty well taken Ploesti out of the picture, and then the Russians captured the Romanian oil fields. So the sources of fuel for the Germans were nil. They were literally out of gas.
The war ended in 45, right?
It ended in 40. The European War ended in 45.
Right.
And I was in combat from November of 44 until April of 45, when it was clear that the European War was going to be ended and shipped back to the zone of interior, that is, back to America. And the plan was that we were going to retrain in B-29 aircraft and go to the Pacific Theater, but the demobilization program started in America, and it was based on points and number of combat missions and various other formula, and I was able to get out. So I got out in July of 45.
Let me ask this question. When you were up in the air, did you see a lot of Germans? Were you fighting the Germans as well?
Yeah, well, we didn't see the
actual
German fighters because they didn't have the fuel.
And your mission was really to destroy those fuel supplies.
That was a primary target, and the second target, which we hit more frequently, were the transportation networks.
And you mean
the rail
lines?
networks, the bridges, and so the Luftwaffe had been pretty well grounded, but they had established strong anti-aircraft bases throughout occupied Europe and the Balkans. So we suffered severe damage from those attacks, and so in the part of the war that I was in, that is the November to April session, our main danger was being shot down by the anti-aircraft, which was being operated by the Luftwaffe.
And you know, one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, did you lose a lot of friends in the war?
Well, yes.
And that was tough on you as a young person, right?
Oh yeah, we all knew that we were subject to being killed, but we didn't think it was going to happen to
actually happen to you,
me, and or my close friends. But my closest friends died in training accidents before they got into combat, and then equipment failure during combat. There was a lot of equipment failure that brought airplanes down, or one of my best friends was killed when he was on takeoff for a mission, and the prop spun off of his plane and crashed into the fuselage and hit a fire and killed his crew before they even got off the ground. And another very close friend was shot down over Germany. So yeah, we lost them, as I say, in training, in combat, and a lot of equipment failure. The production of aircraft during the war was stepped up immediately after Pearl Harbor, the attack on Pearl Harbor. And so a lot of B-24s were built by Ford Motor Company at the biggest factory in the world, the Willow Run factory outside of Detroit. And there were automotive engineers running that didn't know anything about aircraft.
Right. And on that note, we need to take a short break, and we'll be right back on Kathryn Raaker's Born Before 64.